thank you. I put a note in my little script for myself to push record. So thank you. Uh, I will share the recording with you all later and with folks that weren't able to join tonight. You're all welcome to use the chat box to introduce yourselves, tell us where you're tuning in from, and you can also use it throughout the webinar if you have questions. I'll keep an eye on it and bring questions forward. We do ask that you remain muted until we're in a Q&A period, just to keep things quiet for the presenters. And yeah, I'm especially grateful to our guests tonight. We have Bob and Claire joining, who I'll introduce shortly. But before we get into the meat of today's topic, I just wanted to share some context with you about NOFA's work and how new legislation is passed in New York. I know many of you in this meeting have been working on advocacy for quite some time, so hopefully if you have anything to add, you'll just chime in as well. So yeah, I'll talk a little bit about NOFA's policy work, the state legislative process, and then we'll dig into the agenda for tonight. We are talking about 3 bills, the Food Safety and Chemical Disclosure Act, the Sewage Sludge Moratorium, and the Good Food New York bill. And actually, the outline here has good food first, but we're going to talk about that last because Taylor couldn't be here with us tonight, so I'll be covering that too. And then we'll conclude with a few quick ways to stay engaged. All right, so NOFA New York's policy program aims to engage farmers and food system advocates in advocating for sustainable local organic food and farm systems. We are guided by NOFA's membership, of course, the IFOAM Organics International Principles of Organic Agriculture, Health, Ecology, Fairness, and Care, and by, of course, our mission and vision. And our advocacy work is also guided by the HIMA's Principles of Democratic Organizing. So to build power and advance some of the key issues that we work on, we collaborate with many others, including the 6 other NOFA chapters in the Northeast, many federal and regional and state networks and coalitions, and individual partner organizations, a couple of whom we have with us tonight. And this slide here just shows a bunch of the different organizations and coalitions that we work with or are members of. And believe it or not, that's not comprehensive. There's there's more. So quite a big ecosystem of folks working in this space. So just a quick briefer on the New York State legislative process. So in New York, the legislative session this year is running from January 8th to June 12th, but I think it's extended for a couple of days because the budget process took so long. So they need a little bit of extra time to focus on bills. And the way the process works is an issue is identified that requires some sort of legislative intervention, and a bill is drafted. And then a legislator from each chamber, the Assembly and the Senate, introduce the bill into their respective chambers. Sometimes this is done in tandem where the bills are exactly the same. Sometimes there's differences that have to be worked out in the process. And then the bill is debated by the relevant committees in each chamber. So for example, the bills we're talking about tonight, well, some of them are debated in the agriculture committees. And then from the committee, it goes to the full chamber, so the full Assembly and Senate for a vote. Once it passes through both chambers, it goes to the governor's desk and she has to sign or veto it. So that's the general process. And then throughout the process, there are many different opportunities and ways to engage and influence legislators. So, you know, some of the ways that we've engaged are testifying at public hearings. Often the legislators will have public hearings where they'll invite people from the community to come in and speak on particular issues. A little less formally, they have roundtables that are similar, usually not as long. There's, one-on-one meetings with legislators or their staff. Those usually happen during lobby days where there's a bunch of them all at once or, one after another. Memos of support. So organizations like NOFA write up basically one-pagers about why the bill matters to them and their community. And then there's also opportunities to organize and participate call-in and email campaigns. So all of you are probably on NOFA New York's email list and get reminders from me periodically about the bills we're working on and how you can share your support. So things like that are another opportunity. And then media, generating more awareness and buzz about the bill. So through op-eds or letters to the editor, and hosting press conferences for news organizations to come and learn more. So there are 150 assembly members and 63 senators. And as individuals, we have the most sway with the people that represent us. So legislators tend to be especially receptive to the ideas and opinions of the folks that live within their districts. So, keep that in mind as we go along. And if you have a moment to take a look at the folks that represent you in your area, you can access their profile, see what committees they're on, what their interests are, what some of the legislation they're working on is. And yeah, and that's just helpful context to have in mind when you're thinking about doing some outreach to your representatives. So here are the links to find your reps. All right, so I kind of went through somewhat of a lot of information there. Any questions about NOFA's work or about the legislative process before we dig into the bills that we're here to talk about tonight? And Liz, I do see your question, and we will come to that when we get to that bill. Great. And again, for those of you that just joined, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us where you're coming in from. All right. So our first guest for tonight is Bob. And Bob, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about the Food Safety and Chemical Disclosure Act. I'm going to stop sharing so you can start.
Great, thank you, Katie, and good evening, everybody. I'll share my slides here if everybody can see those okay. And I am excited tonight to talk about the New York Food Safety and Chemical Disclosure Act, particularly on a day where a lot has happened with it, which I'll share a little later. And we're really fortunate to have two great sponsors for this bill. So for the Assembly, Dr. Anna Kellis, who folks may know is a PhD nutritional epidemiologist, cares a lot about these issues, was a lecturer in this at Cornell, and then State Senator Brian Kavanaugh, who's really dedicated to environmental issues. So the meat of this bill, there are three major impacts. It has doing three things. One, it bans 3 dangerous chemicals in foods across New York State. 2, it would prohibit synthetic dyes from use in all New York State public school foods. And then 3, it would require disclosure for chemicals added to foods using the secret, generally recognized as safe or GRAS loophole. And I'll explain all these in order. So for the chemical ban, there are 3 specific chemicals in foods that this legislation would remove: red number 3, potassium bromate, and propylparaben. All 3 of these were banned in California recently and are banned or severely limited in the EU, the UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, China, and Japan, with a few exceptions in the EU for cocktail and candied cherries. And all three have affordable and available alternatives that are being used in safer versions of products sold in Europe. So this wouldn't create a huge burden for the food industry to be able to replace these. Now, you may have seen that the FDA did ban red number 3 back in January. And Center for Science and Public Interest, who we're working with on this legislation, did lead that petition to have that happen. But we have this in the bill because this would do a couple of things. One, it would bring this ban up sooner. And then secondly, it would make sure it would happen in New York State, regardless of what happens at the federal level. The second thing this bill would do is remove synthetic dyes from foods sold in schools. So this includes all these FD&C dyes that are petroleum-based, frequently found in candy. For instance, if you go to the candy aisle of your supermarket and you look at the ingredients, you'll see these all over the place. New York City has actually banned these for several decades successfully and without great cost. So really what we're talking about here is making sure that all school kids across New York State get the same benefit that kids in New York City do. And there are exceptions for after school and off-campus activities. In other words, nobody's going to be monitoring foods that are brought in, say, if you're bringing in snacks for sports teams. This is just for foods actually served at the school. And then it's also banned in these other states: Arizona, California, Utah, West Virginia, and Virginia. And the science on this is settled. So Thomas Galligan is the toxicologist at Center for Science and Public Interest. And he's looked at this research closely with his colleagues, with a lot of it being based on this report that the California EPA conducted, which is an extremely comprehensive and rigorous assessment, basically finding that these synthetic food dyes can cause or exacerbate neurobehavioral problems in some children. Not in all children, but it's impossible to predict which children will be affected by this. And of course, these types of effects like hyperactivity, inattention, restlessness are exactly the kinds of things that we don't want to put kids through in a school context. Now, the more complicated thing to explain about this bill, and I'm not going to get too deeply into it because it could take the entire time here of the webinar to explain. But the basic premise is pretty easy to understand. And if you have more questions, we can always refer you to the experts at CSPI, including Counsel Jensen Jose, who helped write this bill. And this part of the bill would shine a light on what's called the secret GRAS loophole. So GRAS, or generally recognized as safe, is this category that the FDA created to grandfather in traditional ingredients that wouldn't need to be tested. So this happened when this chemical testing was started in 1958 nationally. And if you look at the FDA's website, it says it's meant to apply to ingredients like canola oil, vinegar, and spices such as black pepper. So not new chemicals. But over the years, for many reasons, including FDA loopholes and congressional inaction, this kind of secret GRAS backdoor happened, where essentially companies can say, they can self-certify their chemicals and say, okay, we're saying these are generally recognized as safe. We've reviewed them internally. And so they're able to put these in the food system without showing that they underwent rigorous independent testing. As the Environmental Defense Fund has written a lot on this, has said, they're essentially leveraging FDA's inaction here to secretly self-certify these chemicals, and this is a problem. So as a result, we have chemicals in the food supply where we really don't know if they're dangerous until after the fact. In fact, a former FDA deputy commissioner said, quite frankly, that they simply don't have the information to vouch for the safety of many of these chemicals. And we talk to folks in the community, they're really surprised. They assume if this chemical is in our food, it's been shown to be safe. So this third element for the Food Safety and Chemical Disclosure Act would require a database so that companies that sell, distribute, or market food products in New York would have to report these secret GRAS substances to the New York State Department of Agriculture. So basically, just provide simple information to say these are what these chemicals are, and provide some basic information as to their indication of why they're safe. So this isn't, kind of going over the head of FDA. The FDA still would have the final word, but it would provide disclosure and transparency for these chemicals. And this would also include chemicals that hide under the labels natural flavor, artificial flavor, and spices. And there's been a lot written about those loopholes as well. So this is really a powerful element to this law, would really provide disclosure that would help the FDA in principle to be able to identify these chemicals that they're not identifying themselves because of this loophole. So science groups, public facing groups could see what these chemicals are. And if there's a problem, they would be available on this database to look at. And as I said, this is an exciting day for a couple of reasons. One, this article came out in Gothamist today, really well-written article by Jimmy Vielkind about the fact that this is an issue which seems to cross the partisan divide, right? In our highly polarized time where it's very difficult to find anything we can agree on. This is an area where we're getting a lot of engagement from both sides of the aisle. And then also we can share that this bill was passed through the Senate Ag Committee today unanimously on a 7-0 vote. I think one senator let it go through with an aye with reservations, but still, again, having a unanimous vote seems to be a rare thing nowadays. And if you look closely at this picture, you can see Katie herself there behind Assemblymember Kellis. So what we'd ask you to do is take action. Like Katie said, we have a limited time because the budget was so late to be able to act on all the legislation we're talking about this evening. So contact your state legislators, let them know you support this bill. I think Katie was going to share a link that NOFA has put together. A quick action alert that will let your legislators know that you support this bill. There's been some momentum on it in terms of some new sponsors recently, particularly in the Assembly, which, as we know, is harder to get legislation through than the Senate sometimes. And also, we want to let Assembly Ag Chair Donna Lepardo know that we care about this bill and this needs to be placed on the Ag Committee agenda. And we've got plenty of information. We can, share this slide deck if you want. And also, other resources that we have from CSPI, other partners involved in this at the national level. The Environmental Working Group has done a lot on this. Consumer Reports is a great partner on this bill as well. And then, as I mentioned, the Environmental Defense Fund wrote a whole series excellently written on broken grass. So all the problems with this grass determination and its problem that's been going on for several years now. And this is my contact information. We'd love to talk to you and connect you to the experts on this as well. And I just want to finish by also welcoming my co-convener and co-founder, Kelly Moltzen, who I think is fortunate because she got out of jury duty. She was worried that she would be stuck in that, but she's here, and I've learned a lot from her about these issues and its connection to the agriculture system.
Thanks so much, Bob. That was really informational. Appreciate it. Um, we have a few minutes before we move on to the next topic. If anyone has any questions for Bob, um, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask, or type them in the chat box and I can read them out. All right. Okay,
I
well, if
could
any, oh, sorry, go ahead, Bob.
I could just add one thing, and that is the relationship to this of what's going on nationally.
Mm,
So we've heard supposedly, right, that synthetic dyes were going to start to be banned at the federal level. And CSPI has been watching this closely. And in reality, so far, the two dyes that were banned were dyes that were not used by industry anyway. So what's been talked about is a voluntary agreement. So there's a plan for a plan. There hasn't really been action, which really shows that we have to be acting at the state level to move this forward. And again, with all the dysfunction that's going on federally, we can't plan that anything is going to happen at the federal level, particularly when there's always the possibility that donations could come from powerful industries and kind of disrupt the whole regulatory process. And that is the same also with the grass. HHS Secretary RFK Jr. has talked about the grass process, but again, we haven't seen anything concrete. There's a plan for a plan. So we really need to be taking advantage of this at the state level.
thank you.
Hey, I was wondering if I could ask a question, Bob. I'm curious because the bill has not been placed on committee in the assembly. Do we have a sense of what the pushback is or what opposition to this bill might look like?
Yes. So I think I can tell you the original pushback, which seems to have, I think, faded somewhat, is the belief that we could wait on FDA to act. And I think that argument has kind of eroded, since what we've seen particularly with the FDA's staff being cut so thoroughly that it would be difficult, even if decisions were made to act on this, for them even just to have the people power to be able to do anything about this at the federal level. I think in some ways the GRAS database is new and challenging, and perhaps that there are folks who are doing legislative analysis who aren't sure what to do with it, and maybe they see it as complicated. At the same time, there is pushback from industry, so definitely the chemical industry, some of the folks in the consumer brands world are pushing back, which is completely predictable. But we are seeing some momentum on this. So I think it's just a matter of, showing that folks care about this. And I think then it will move.
Thanks, Bob. Any other questions? All right. Our next guest tonight is Claire with Environmental Advocates, and she's here to talk about sewage sludge. Over to you, Claire.
Thanks so much, Katie, and thanks for having me. I'm just going to get my slides set up. All right. Is everything looking normal on your guys' side?
Looks good.
Okay, great. Yeah, so my name is Claire Walsh Winsler. I'm the Director of Food, Agriculture, and Land Use Policy at Environmental Advocates New York. We're a statewide environmental group. I'm based in Ithaca, New York, and we work on everything from lead pipes to climate change to soil health and to toxins. And so today the topic that I have for you is actually kind of a combination of those last two, of soil health and of toxins. My title, Protecting New York's Farmland, Food, Drinking Water from Toxic Sewage Sludge. This sewage sludge is also known as biosolids sometimes. You might have heard about it in the news under that title. And we're going to get more into it. So on the background of this slide, you can see some of what this sewage sludge looks like. I think it's important to, kind of have a visual to see what that looks like at the wastewater treatment level. This came to our attention first because of, especially in the news, coverage around PFAS contamination. So this sewage sludge is contaminated with a bunch of different stuff, and there's been a lot of articles around it. We see states across the country banning its use. But what is it? So this sewage sludge, it is a combination of our household waste. So honestly, from our septic tanks and from industrial manufacturing. And so because of the age of our sewage treatment plants and our sewage systems, it's a combined product. It goes to the wastewater treatment facility and it is separated into water and into sludge. That sludge is then processed into what's called Class A sludge or Class B. You might see different definitions around if you delve more into this very specific world, but it really just refers to how processed it is. Either way, these products are really not safe. This sludge is spread on farmland and it contaminates soil, crops, and drinking water through being spread. Some of the contaminants are PFAS, forever chemicals. For folks that aren't familiar, these are chemicals that are in a lot of our consumer products. They're in nonstick items, they're in waterproofing. We know that they have really toxic and detrimental health impacts, from cancer to infertility. They're really scary, and we're working to ban them in lots of products. But as a result of our manufacturing and the fact that they're so common around us, that they're in our waste, they're in these sewage sludge products as well. So we've got PFAS chemicals, heavy metals, microplastics, industrial solvents, pharmaceutical drugs like antibiotics, antifungals, antidepressants, really just a slurry of contaminants and of toxic stuff. So we have been working on this bill, a sewage sludge response program, in order to stop this practice. We don't believe that our farmland should be used as a dumping ground because we don't really have a good place to put our sewage sludge. Right now, it's being put into landfills, it's being incinerated somewhat, and it's being spread on farmland. And for the last 45 years, the EPA and the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation has said that spreading on farmland is the environmentally beneficial option, that it's a good replacement for fertilizers. And especially with the crisis we have around PFAS now, we just know that that's not the case. These chemicals contaminate our soils, they uproot into crops, especially ones like brassicas where they absorb heavy metals too. They proliferate into our drinking water sources and our groundwater, and they're absorbed into our food. So we think that this needs to stop. We're working on a big statewide coalition with NOFA New York to pass this bill. It's a Kellis-Harcum bill, Dr. Anna Kellis and Pete Harcum. So the three components of the bill are the 5-year moratorium. We think we need to pause this, fully understand the extent of the contamination before we let sewage sludge spreading continue. Testing of soil, water, and the sludge itself to better understand what the extent of the contamination is. And then a farmer support fund to support farmers in this time of transition, both with financial means, but also technical expertise, what a transition would look like for them. So this is sort of a 3-part bill we've been working on. We're learning a lot from our neighbors as well. There are bans in Maine and in Connecticut, and one's proposed in Oklahoma, Washington State, Massachusetts, all over the country. Every day I kind of hear about a new different ban bill. It's good because we don't want sludge spread in our neighboring states or states around the country. But there's also some downsides for New York. Well, we still allow this. It means that sewage sludge products from other states, because they're not legally allowed to be spread on their land, are shipped into our land. So, there's been a lot of contamination we've seen in Albany County, in Schoharie County, in Steuben County. And in Albany County, we know a bunch of those biosolids were shipped in from Massachusetts too. So not only are we dealing with our contaminated toxic sludge products, we're also dealing with them from out of state, which exacerbates the crisis we're in. So this bill we really see as the response. Actually, just yesterday, it passed through the Senate Environmental Conservation Committee, and then it's going to the Agriculture Committee. It's in both because of the Farmer Support Fund is a part of agricultural law, essentially. But we are excited to move it forward. We are working to see it on an assembly agenda, similar to the first bill that you heard about in today's webinar. One thing you could do is contact your legislators in Albany. I think you're going to hear that a lot tonight, and tell them why we should pass this bill, the PFAS in Biosolids Management Act. I can add the bill link to the chat in a second too. This link that I'll add to the chat, it is an action that you can take through Environmental Advocacy's website. You put in your zip code and it'll send a message to the governor and to your assembly member and local senator too. Like Katie said, the strongest way to use your voice is often to your own representative. So it's really helpful to hear that their constituents care about this issue. And this is one that we know farmers care a lot about, because farmers care so much about soil and about the crops they're growing and the land they work. But it's also one that affects all of us. You know, I say if you drink water and eat food in New York, then this is one that affects you. And it's one that we really need to put a stop to right now, because the further along we get with this contamination, the worse we will be and the more remediation it will require. So it really is something that just makes sense to stop now. So I think that's what I have. My email is down there. I can put it in the chat too, especially for all the farmers out there. If you are interested in working on this bill, in fighting against it, in giving the farming perspective on this front too, love to hear from you. Love to have you join our coalition. So feel free to get in touch, and happy to always chat more about sewage sludge. Does anyone have any questions?
Thanks so much, Claire. And thanks for putting that link in the chat. Does anyone have any questions for Claire about this bill? I did want to give like a quick plug too for there are, I think, 3 bills that NOFA has also endorsed that are focused on really the upstream impacts of PFAS contamination. So trying to cut down on the household waste that contains PFAS. So, you know, Claire mentioned a bunch of different household products, cookware, you know, lots of makeup, feminine hygiene products. And there are 3 bills in the legislature this session that would put product bans in place for products that contain PFAS, like those everyday household products, feminine hygiene products, and makeup products. So those kind of bills are also important. Like, we see the urgent need to stop using these chemicals, period. And we're also seeing the way that they're being sort of spread throughout our ecosystem. So we need to really tackle this on many fronts. So I just wanted to call out that the work that's happening in that coalition as well. And I can put a link to more information about that in the chat in a minute too.
I totally agree, Katie. And, you know, hopefully we'll see some of the upstream contamination bills get over the line this session. You know, we thought they might happen last year, and we had that late budget. We're hopeful. I did get a direct message question that I could read out loud and answer, if that works.
Yeah.
Sure. Someone asked, why are biosolids legal in the first place? So I think, you know, it's a good question. I think folks thought it was a good way to deal with this stuff. Like, we exist as a society, we create sewage. And while there was still dissent and questions when this practice first started, you know, the idea that putting it in our landfills or setting it on fire and contributing to air pollution, it is one of those tricky questions, because there's not a magic solution here. There's no amazing solution we have yet. And so it was legalized in the 80s and 90s in New York State and was promoted by the EPA and DEC, like I was saying before. There are some regulations for heavy metals and now for PFAS within these, but it isn't it isn't sufficient. For example, the PFAS regulation levels are at 20 parts per billion to 50 parts per billion are allowed and monitored within biosolids, and 50 parts per billion and above are those solids have to be, they're not allowed to be land applied anymore. But for example, the drinking water amounts for PFAS are 4 to 10 parts per trillion. So we're talking about orders of magnitude. Just this threshold is very high, and it's not protective of human health, of ecosystem health, or of wildlife. So while folks would say that they're already working on this and it's regulated so it's safe, we know now that it's really not. And the more we learn about these PFAS chemicals, the more we understand how lasting they are. The fact that they're bioaccumulative puts us at greater threat, and we just really need to ban this stuff. So
Thanks, Claire, and great question.
oh, one last point too, in case anyone does the action in the chat and says, I just want to talk to more legislators about biosolids and PFAS. Similar to the bill Bob was talking about, we are working to get on an assembly agenda. On the assembly side, that's on the NCON committees. That would be Assembly Member Glick, in case anyone has spoken to her office or feels like making an extra call to Assembly Member Glick's office. That is really a pressure point we're trying to work on to get on an agenda before the end of session.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, and like I mentioned in the beginning, Taylor, who is going to be joining us from Community Food Advocates, had a conflict come up. So you're going to be hearing from me again about the Good Food New York bill. So I'm going to share some more slides. All right. Just a minute while my computer catches up with me. All right. Okay, so the Good Food New York bill is something that's been on NOFA's priority list for a couple of years now. And so NOFA's been involved with it through parts of its development. So have a pretty good knowledge around the bill to share with you. And also I'll mention that Claire is also on the coalition that's advocating for this bill. So Claire, please chime in if you have anything to add as I go through this. And I know some others on the call have also been paying close attention to this bill too. So again, feel free to chime in if you have anything to add. So first, some background on the movement that gave rise to this bill. So the Good Food Purchasing Program is a national movement to transform the way that public institutions purchase food. So public institutions serve millions of meals a day across the country, in schools, hospitals, jails, etc. And they have significant buying power. But in most cases, they're incentivized to source the cheapest food, even when not legally required to. So, while they're providing essential food and services to their community, they're also inadvertently propping up exploitative systems that produce cheap food. So we know that cheap food is often the result of cut corners that enable food manufacturers to exploit workers, to exploit the environment and animals. Cheap food typically isn't the most fresh or nutritious and depends on really overextended supply chains that are really vulnerable to disruption, like we saw during COVID and like we see during natural disasters or extreme weather events. So the solution proposed by the Good Food Purchasing Program is to help public institutions develop procurement strategies that prioritize food from suppliers that protect and advance community, worker, animal, and environmental well-being. So this map gives you a sense of where some good food purchasing programs have cropped up across the country. A few years ago, institutions in New York City and Buffalo were interested in adopting some GFPP, Good Food Purchasing Program principles in their institutions. And they pretty quickly realized that there was an issue in New York State law. So New York State procurement law requires that public institutions source food from the lowest bidder, or in other words, the supplier that offers the cheapest food. And so their hands were kind of tied in having to contract with the lowest bidder. So advocates in New York City, led by community food advocates, and in Buffalo, led by the Good Food Buffalo Coalition, started working with the legislature to draft a bill that would allow public institutions more flexibility when purchasing food that advances at least one of 5 values. And those values are nutrition or community health, local economies, valued workforce, environmental sustainability, and animal welfare. And the bill also prioritizes purchasing from minority and women-owned businesses and farms. So since the initial bill was drafted, the coalition has really expanded. There's now a statewide coalition, which NOFA is a part of, along with the Good Food Buffalo Coalition. And there's a really diverse group of folks that are parts of these coalitions: farmers, there's union leaders, labor rights groups, animal rights groups, environmental orgs, and a lot more. So it's been really exciting and rewarding and eye-opening to see all of these different people working together from different parts of the food system and with different specific interests, towards this common goal. So from so what's more specifically what the bill would do is that it gives the public institutions the ability to contract with suppliers that are 10% more pricey than the lowest bidder. So it's a little bit of wiggle room, but a starting point to give those local institutions more autonomy in what they're choosing to purchase. And some of the benefits, particularly for the farming and agriculture community, are that this would allow for institutions to contract with local farms or food businesses who are currently locked out of the marketplace because they can't compete with those depleted prices that are offered by those larger suppliers, like Cisco is one that's pretty popular in New York, at least. And then with that more flexibility, institutions can enter into contracts with suppliers in their own communities, creating a more reliable market opportunity for those businesses and those farms. And as you probably all know, small farms in particular are facing a lot of challenges. For many years, we've been seeing really rapid consolidation in the agricultural world that puts small farms out of business. More recently, we've seen federal funding for small farms withdrawn. Climate change and increasing intense weather, and then unstable markets are all things that that small farmers in New York are really facing. And so this bill would offer a new pathway to a new marketplace, an institutional marketplace for these farms and businesses. And I mean, moreover, the farms really deserve to be able to feed their local communities, and the community members deserve to have access to local quality, nutritious food. In addition to modernizing New York's restrictive and outdated procurement rules, the bill would also enable institutions to update their purchasing policies and put in place contracts that would source food that their communities want. I already said this piece. Sorry, I'm repeating myself. It can also give a boost to local food programs like farm to school programs. We see a lot of farm to school programs across the state, but there's a lot more schools that aren't participating that maybe would be able to participate, or at least would be able to purchase more local food by having this flexibility. Um, and I think I mentioned this a little bit before, but the bill also adds transparency to our food system. In order for municipalities or public institutions to contract with suppliers, they will be required to gather some information, some pretty basic information that currently isn't gathered about these suppliers. You know, as simple as like what their address is. And so just having some more of a paper trail of like where this food is coming from will be really helpful for having a better sense of the institutional marketplace and where the food's coming from and how the decisions are being made. So last year, this bill passed through the Assembly and the Senate. It was vetoed by the governor. So this year, we're really working hard to resecure legislative support for the bill, while also working with the governor's team to understand and address what some of their concerns are. And at the end of April, a big group of us in the coalition went up to Albany and met with several legislative offices and hosted a press conference. That's what that picture there is. And right now, the bill is in the hands of the Local Governments Committee and the Procurements and Contracts Committee. So those are the two committees that look at procurement law in the respective chambers. So similar to what others have shared earlier, you can call your representatives and urge them to support this bill, share with them why it matters to you. You know, if you know they're already co-sponsors, it can still be helpful to call them and just ask them to garner more support among their colleagues. If they're not already co-sponsors, urge them to co-sponsor and support the bill. And we also have a sign-on letter that is designed for farms and businesses to sign on to. So it basically is a letter to the legislature and the governor to demonstrate widespread farm support for the bill. So I'll put all of those links I just mentioned in the chat. And I do have one question in the chat so far. So what was the governor's opposition? I knew that question was coming. The governor's veto memo was really like extremely vague. It kind of said, you know, we're concerned that municipalities wouldn't be implementing this exactly the same everywhere, which is kind of the point of the bill, is to give municipalities and public institutions to empower them to be making the decisions for their own communities, right? And so digging a little deeper, it seems that there was some opposition from the Farm Bureau that came to the governor's office and really swayed her at the last minute. So really our task this year is to work with her office and work through some of those issues that were raised to her at the end of the session, and make sure that she understands the realities of the bill, because a lot of those concerns were really based on misunderstanding of what the bill is actually doing. Any other questions on Good Food New York? Liz, returning to your question from earlier on, why do you think Senator Hinchey did not include the Good Food bill in her package? I think similarly, each year she puts out a package of bills that are good for New York agriculture. And I think because there is disagreement among the conventional ag community about this bill, she went with bills that were seen as more safe and more generally accepted by conventional ag.
But would that include the carbon tax?
I mean, in my opinion, no. She did include it in her package.
Oh.
I think she hasn't been hearing enough from the opposition about that bill. So for a little more context, there's a bill in the legislature that passed the Senate, and it would give tax credits to farms based on carbon sequestered. And it's a very flawed bill for a lot of reasons. We don't have any standard metrics for measuring carbon, and the ones that we do have are highly flawed. There's a lot of issues about, testing in one location at one time. What does that actually tell us about the soil's ability to sequester carbon for the long term, which is what we really need? It's also very narrowly focused on carbon when we know that what we need for protecting farmland into the future, against the climate crisis and for enabling farms to help fight the crisis is a more holistic, whole ecosystem driven approach where we're looking at water quality, we're looking at other ecosystem services, we're looking at biodiversity, soil health, and the whole array of things that we know are needed to make a farm resilient. And so this bill, because it has such a narrow focus, we feel would really backfire and not be an effective strategy for reducing carbon or for sequestering carbon for the long term. So unfortunately, that bill squeezed through the Senate without opposition this year. So I've been this week reaching out to members of the Assembly to voice our concern. And if any of you would like more information about that, I'm certainly happy to talk more about it too.
Yeah, I was on a New York News call with Harry Bronson, and I was able to raise it there.
Oh, thank you. Any other questions about any of these bills? All right, cool. Well, I'm really grateful to all of you for being part of my experiment. I hope we can have more opportunities to meet virtually and talk and share what NOFA is doing in the policy space and get you all engaged in the future. But this was kind of my first attempt, so I really appreciate you all showing up for it. And I did want to share one last plug for getting involved in NOFA. So I think all of you are probably already on our email list because you got this invitation and showed up today. But in case you're not, there's the link to sign up for email. We use Instagram and Facebook. And then also I just set up a Blue Sky account. It's kind of the alternative to Twitter or X. And I'm just getting the hang of it. So if you're on there and want some more people to follow, please follow me and I'll promise over time I'll get better at using it. All right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Bob and Claire. This was really great having you guys here. And I hope I know I learned a lot and I hope everyone did. Really appreciate you all. Have a great night.
Thanks so much, Katie. Great to meet everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Well done.
Bye. Right, I just wanted to make sure I saved the transcript. I've been finding the transcripts helpful for it's easier to like go back in a transcript and find something sometimes than it is to try to, go through a whole recording.